Hi everyone, welcome back to the Murder Tapes podcast, season 2, episode 6. I hope you all are doing well. I'm so sorry that this episode is a little late. If I'm being completely honest, this week has just been really hard for me. I've been working a lot of double shifts overnight and overstudying to the point where my arms have been flaring up again due to a stress rash. And my eyes are twitching a lot, so I'm thinking of cutting my hours at work and just spending more time de-stressing as much as possible. But aside from all of that, I chose this case today because it isn't talked about as much as it should be, and I think a lot of you will find this very interesting because there is a little puzzle aspect to it. So today we're going to be talking about the murder of Ricky McCormick. On June 30th, 1999, a woman was driving near Highway 367, not too far from West Alton, Missouri. As she was driving, something caught her eye in one of the cornfields. She decided to get out of her car and go see what it was. When she reached the area, she realized that it was Ricky McCormick's partially decomposed body. He was wearing torn up Lee jeans and a white stained t-shirt. Police would report that his body had reached severe decomposition to the point where the flesh on his hands had rotted away and his fingertips separated. Luckily, although his fingertips had separated, he was identified by fingerprint analysis. It's important to note that because Ricky had mental health issues and was low income, that this case almost actually got swept under the rug. And the only reason it didn't was because strangely 2 notes were found in his pockets. Now you may be wondering what these notes may have said, and surprisingly, not even the FBI knows. As always, it will be available on our Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast and in the show notes if you want to take a look at them. Before we get into the details, I do want to point out that this information wasn't released until 12 years after his death. And what I mean by that is that these notes had actually not been made public until 12 years later. And this is because the FBI's Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, also known as CRRU, was actively trying to decode these messages at the Quantico, Virginia headquarters, but got nowhere. It's worth mentioning that the FBI has successfully decoded more than 99% of these types of cases in only a couple of hours. The notes were even ranked 3rd on the FBI's toughest list to crack, following the Zodiac Killer from 1969. The FBI posted these notes on their website in order to ask the public for help, and they stated that even if these notes turned out to be a love letter or grocery list, they still wanted to learn how to decode it, as it's a cipher system that they are not familiar with. And today there are tons of threads and web pages that post their theories and opinions on what the messages say. One in particular that stuck out to me the most will be linked in the show notes, and the website is called Case Crackers the Puzzler. I kind of went down a rabbit hole and read almost every thread there is about these codes. I even printed them out myself and began writing my own thoughts down. So if you want to take a look at them, see if you can make any connections, feel free to do so, and definitely let me know what you find. Ricky McCormick was born on June 14, 1958. His family would recall that in his youth, he would stand alone at recess, act out, and tell strange stories to others. He dropped out of high school and never learned how to read, spell, or write, and would instead scribble, which is why a lot of people assume that these notes were written by his murderer or murderers. He also didn't know how to drive, and remember that he was found about 15 miles away from his home. So how did he get there? His mother would state she believed he was mentally challenged. A psychiatrist had also told Ricky that he has a brick wall in his head, to which his Aunt Gloria said, quote, "He said Ricky refused to break that wall. He didn't like the life of living poor and had an active imagination." One of his cousins would also recall that he, quote, "talked like he was in another world and may have been schizophrenic." Due to his education level and not being able to read or write, he worked low-grade jobs, typically on the night shift, or remained unemployed. He also received disability payments because of his chronic heart and lung issues. When he was 34 years old, he was charged with statutory rape for impregnating a girl younger than 14. He had 2 children with her and referred to her as Pretty Baby. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of people believed he had a mental illness, but despite this, he was found fit to stand trial. He pleaded guilty and spent 13 months at the Farmington Correctional Center. Once he was released from prison, he began working the graveyard shift at an Amoco gas station located in downtown St. Louis. We're now going to get into the potential suspects of the case. The first would be the owners of the gas station Ricky worked at. The original owner of the gas station was named Fawaz M. Hamdan. Oddly, he killed his neighbor with a butcher knife after getting into an argument in May of 1994. He was serving a life sentence for second-degree murder when he died in Missouri's Potosi Correctional Center. A man named Juma Hamdallah was a Palestinian immigrant that used the name David Radigan until 2002, and he took over the business. He then employed his brother Baha Bob Hamdallah despite their rocky relationship. Just 2 months after Ricky's death, Juma shot Baha. Baha survived and ended up not filing charges against him, but police stated Baha was being linked to gang members and narcotic use. It was also noted that Baha was violent and in possession of lots of weapons, including handguns and knives. They also had another brother named Jameli Hamdallah, who was a registered sex offender, although police reported that Baha was the most volatile. When Baha moved to St. Louis in 1997 from Cleveland, Ohio, he was just 22 years old. He was driving in a blue Mazda Protege when a detective saw him drive up next to a man named Terrence Clark. He then leaned out of his car window and shot him with a .38 caliber revolver. Luckily, Terrence was able to escape unharmed, but Baha was never prosecuted after being arrested. Then, just 9 months later, on March 4th of 1998, he was visiting another one of his brothers named Bajat Hamdallah. He worked at a small grocery store called the Family Market in the Tower Grove East neighborhood. The brothers got into an argument and Baha grabbed a gun and began shooting at him from across the street. Unfortunately, a bullet ended up tearing into the left side of Bajat's abdomen and knocked him down. Baha then got into his car and drove off. Eyewitness reports included the manager, and they verified that this is what happened, but a bloodied Bajat stated that he never saw his assailant before and described him as a Hispanic man with a goatee instead of his 5'10", 225-pound Middle Eastern brother. Whether or not he said this out of loyalty or fear is unknown. Just 6 days later, Baha ended up turning himself in and was arrested on a felony charge of first-degree assault, but once again, his brother told authorities that he didn't want to prosecute. State court files don't have any record of this incident. In the same month, while Baha was working at the Amoco gas station, he was arrested once more on a felony charge for second-degree assault. He had beaten a man named Elro Carr with a rusty hammer. He had also threatened to kill him. According to Baha's family, Elro was a homeless drug addict that often loitered around the property, and Baha told police, quote, "I just figured I'd take care of this myself." Just 2 weeks before Baha was supposed to go to court for the incident, Elro was gunned down a couple of blocks away from the family-owned Amoco gas station. Unfortunately, Elro died and the charges were dropped against Baha. The case was never solved and no arrests were made, but a lot of police officers believe he was murdered by Baha, according to reports. This wouldn't be the end of the violence, however. A couple of minutes before sunrise on June 15, 1999, just 2 weeks before Ricky's death, Ricky walked up to the counter at the Greyhound bus terminal and purchased a one-way ticket to Orlando. This would be the last of 2 trips to Florida he made in 1999. Police aren't aware of who Ricky met during his stay in room 280 at the Econo Lodge in Orlando, but police gathered phone records of him and his girlfriend named Sandra Jones and noticed lots of calls being made to several different people in Central Florida weeks before he arrived. Him and his girlfriend called some of the same numbers during the 2 stays Ricky was in Orlando, and the family-owned Amoco gas station he worked at was one of them. Sandra would state that she believed Ricky went to Florida in order to pick up marijuana. She told police he would accept offers to pick up and deliver packages in exchange for money. He often went to Florida in order to do so, and even brought the drugs into the apartment that they shared together in the Clinton Peabody housing project south of downtown. She remembers the drugs being sealed in Ziploc bags, rolled together into bundles the size of baseballs. The most alarming thing to police was that Ricky told her he was holding these stashes for Baha. She said Ricky didn't like talking about his trips to Orlando with her, but every time he came back, he seemed to be scared. Ricky was involved with lots of scary people and was often described by others as being paranoid. Police believe in his last days he sought out safe places to stay. At 3 p.m. on June 22, 1999, Ricky walked into Barnes Jewish Hospital's emergency room alone. He complained that he had chest pains and shortness of breath. As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, he had these problems his whole life. He often went to the ER and suffered from asthma and chest pains. According to his doctors, he told them that he didn't abuse drugs or alcohol. His friends and family also said that he didn't. However, he did tell them that he smoked at least a pack of cigarettes a day since he was 10 years old and drank coffee by the gallon. He estimated that he drank more than 20 caffeinated drinks a day. His doctors ruled out a heart attack, but admitted him for observation and kept him there for 2 days. He left the hospital on June 24th with orders to return for follow-up visits in the coming week, but he never made it to those appointments. Once he left the hospital, he took a bus to his Aunt Gloria's apartment and visited her for about an hour. He always treated her home as a sanctuary, as he was closer to her than his mom, who only lived just around the corner. His grandma would say, quote, "Everybody needs someone to talk to now and then. Ricky would come visit and talk with me." While speaking with her, he wouldn't go too much into detail as he normally would. She offered to drive him anywhere he needed to go, but he declined her offers and left shortly after. His grandma would tell authorities her last image of him was him walking down the street. The next day, around 5 p.m., Ricky entered another emergency room at Forest Park Hospital. It was less than 2 miles away from the previous one. During this visit, he complained that he had trouble breathing after mowing the grass. His doctors diagnosed the wheezing as another asthma flare-up, but this time he was not admitted. He was released at 5:50 p.m., but police aren't sure on the actual time he left the hospital. According to his grandma, she heard that he had actually spent the night in the waiting room and left the next morning. His grandma believes that his hospital visits were attempts to hide away. Quote, "Maybe he knew he got into something that put his life on the line. He knew he could have stayed here, but maybe he didn't want to put my life on the line." Once his girlfriend was notified of his death, she told police that she believed Baja killed him. She also stated that after he returned from Orlando, she got the impression that he may have done something wrong, and if anyone was going to hurt him, it would be Baja. On December 23, 1999, Detective Jana Walters of the St. Charles County Sheriff's Department received a call from Sergeant Ed Cooner of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department's Homicide Division. He stated that he had information on Ricky's death and wanted to arrange an interagency meeting in order to discuss it. 9 investigators gathered on the 4th floor of St. Louis Police Headquarters about 6 days later. The gathering included Walter and her partner, Detective Michael Yarborough, members of St. Louis Homicide and Narcotics Division, investigators with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and a special agent from the FBI. Walters and Yarborough learned that St. Louis police were currently investigating a man named Gregory Lamar Knox. He was a major drug dealer that operated in and around the complex that Ricky lived at. He was also a suspect in multiple homicides, including at least 2 murder-for-hire schemes. A confidential informant also told police that Gregory was responsible for murdering a black man that worked at a gas station on Chouteau Avenue, and their body was dumped near West Alton. St. Louis police also linked the Hamdallah brothers with criminal activity and possible association with Gregory. St. Charles detectives wanted to try and figure out as much information as they could on Gregory and the Hamdallah brothers. So they began conducting stakeouts at the Amigo gas station and the homes of the owners and employees. No arrests were made, but Yarborough stated that there was suspicious activity, but not enough to prove that any of them were responsible for Ricky's death. Gregory and Baja did end up making their way back to prison for other crimes. Gregory was arrested on July 25, 2000, and pleaded guilty in January of 2001 to charges of possession with intent to distribute crack cocaine and for carrying a firearm during and in relation to a drug trafficking crime. There was also a HUD report made in March of 2001 to Congress that stated Gregory was a suspect in at least 4 homicides that occurred in 1998 and 1999 in LaSalle Park Homes and Clinton Peabody public housing developments in St. Louis. They were also made aware that he was the #1 supplier of narcotics to LaSalle Park Homes. Gregory was serving his sentence at the Federal Medical Center in Lexington, Kentucky, and was set to be released in November of 2013. I'm not sure if he was released or not. I couldn't find any information on that, but if you have found anything on it, please let me know. On October 13th, 2000, Baja was managing another store called Charlie's Food Market in Madison, Illinois. He ended up getting into an argument with a customer named Robert Steptoe. There were different versions of events presented in court, but the jury convicted Baja of first-degree murder after he shot Robert in the face with a 9mm Glock pistol outside the store. In September of 2002, a Madison County judge sentenced Baja to 38 years in prison for killing Robert. About 4 years later, in May 2006, an Illinois appellate court ruled Baja's lawyer erred for not calling a gunshot residue expert to testify in person in the shooting case. This led the appellate to grant a retrial. In the second go-round, the jury bought Baja's claims of self-defense and his version of events, in which the gun went off while he and Robert were struggling for control of the pistol. On May 15, 2008, Baja walked out of court a free man. One of the Hamdallah brothers, named Bajat, said that Juma now lives in the Philippines and that Baja has since married and relocated back to the Cleveland area in his attempt to start over following his Illinois murder trial. Gregory responded to the Riverfront Times by email about Ricky's case and said, quote, "At this moment, this is all new information to me, and I have no information that could help your case. The field where Ricky was found in West Alton has no memorial, and there hasn't been any new evidence presented." Ricky's family stated that they haven't heard about the Hamdallahs, Gregory, or any of the other details regarding his death. They also didn't know about the notes found in his pockets until the local news broadcasted reports on the code. His mom would say, quote, "They told us the only thing in his pockets was the emergency room ticket. Now 12 years later, they come back with this chicken scratch shit. The only thing he could write was his name. He didn't write in no code." Don Olson, however, stood by his assessment, saying, quote, "I have every confidence that Ricky wrote the notes. They are done in more of a format of something written to oneself than something written to someone else." As an example, he points to circles drawn around some segments of code that suggest a to-do list where items are marked as tasks completed. Sometimes tips generate a seed that generates an ultimate break. The codes were released in the hope that someone would see this and suggest ideas. We can become tunnel visioned. We know a little bit about this case, and sometimes that puts us at a disadvantage. Aside from this information, the area he was found in had been known for being a dumping ground for murderers. In 1995, a sex worker was found murdered with gunshot wounds. And that was all the information that I was able to find. I'm not sure if police, have maybe found some more pieces of evidence and just haven't released them to the public yet, or if someone is currently still trying to decode those notes. And if you or someone you know has any information, please contact the FBI at 1-800-225-5324. And if you can decode these notes or have seen similar ones, please write to CRRU at the following address: FBI Laboratory Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, 2501 Investigation Parkway, Quantico, Virginia, 22135. And in the attention line, please write Ricky McCormick case. But as always, all evidence will be linked in the show notes. Feel free to DM me if you have any theories. I'd love to hear them, as I've made some myself. Feel free to also follow our Instagram at Murder Tapes Podcast or my personal at Annalisa. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the show, please leave a review, as it helps out so much, and I hope to see you on the next one.